We talk about Joshua Roy's NHL debut and first NHL goal, and then we discuss some less discussed NHL prospects, Simon Nemec, David Jiricek, Ryan Johnson, and a lot more coming up on today's show on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we've got a breakdown of Joshua Roy's first NHL goal and NHL debut, but then after that, in our second and third segments, we'll be talking about some less discussed NHL prospects. We'll talk about on defense first. We've got Simon Nemec, Luke Evangelista, David Jiricek, Ryan Johnson, some players we haven't really talked about too much this year, but are doing fairly well. Then in our third segment, we'll talk about some forwards. We've got Luke Evangelista, who's doing pretty well, Connor Zari, Tyson Forster, and Ridly Greig. With Joshua Roy in our first segment as well, we'll talk about what led to him being in the NHL now, how his progression happened over the years, and how he's evolved his game to adapt to NHL competition fairly quickly in a short amount of time. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So all you have to do is go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app and use the Locked On your first purchase to get started. Before we get into any of that as well, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with Joshua Roy, who finally got an NHL call-up after a really good start to his AHL campaign, right? I mean, he's been doing fairly well with Laval, and, despite a kind of cold streak midway through, he kind of picked it up recently, and now we're seeing a really good adaptation from Joshua Roy to the NHL game. His first 2 games were a bit rough, but then he scored his first NHL goal and then played a really good couple of games after that, right?
He really did, and I was lucky enough to actually catch his debut live. It's always fun to go to the Bell Center for a game, and especially when Edmonton's in town and McDavid is being booed on every puck touch. I'd be lying if I said I didn't boo once or twice throughout the evening, just to feel like I was part of the action. But it's always a fun time. But his debut was very, very subtle. Like, he was very quiet. There's clearly still some nerves in there, and he didn't quite slot in with his line mates just yet. It took him 2.5 games to kind of be on beat with Sean Monahan, which it takes some adapting for sure, with how quickly he processes the game. But he really just has been relying on his hockey mind to kind of guide him through this very new experience of playing his first NHL games. And as you said, I think the adaptation has been pretty solid on a game-to-game basis. And what for you has kind of marked the progression on that game-to-game basis? Because for me, it's been just the comfort he's had in processing and in trusting his reads, even though the level of competition is so much higher.
Yeah, I felt like in the first couple of games, he was kind of chasing play and figuring out what works. He was still a step behind mentally on the play.
Yeah.
His processing not only caught up to speed, but he started hunting down the puck and staying ahead of plays mentally and kind of reading where the puck's going to go and placing himself in the right spots. I feel like it's really the positional comfort that changed a lot between his first game and his third. Like I said, the first couple of games, the nerves were clearly there, and he was kind of a step behind. But in that third game, you saw a lot more proactiveness from Joshua Roy. And proactiveness is key in the NHL. You need to stay ahead of plays mentally. And I feel like Joshua Roy did a great job of that in his last 2 games. Overall, I mean, what's really interested me with Roy is the progression and how he got here, because this was not at all the type of player I expected him to become, at all. I mean, in his draft year, he was a player. I mean, he's one of the first prospects I've followed from draft -1 to NHL debut, fully. And Joshua Roy in his draft -1 was overweight, playing on a team that didn't really surround him well, and wasn't really keeping up with play in terms of his skating, in terms of his positioning. He was mainly benefiting off of half-wall shots, hard snipes in top corners, off the power play, that kind of thing, and mainly just passing to his teammates and letting them figure out the transition game, letting them skate it up the ice, and then kind of positioning himself off the puck.
And
But
poaching. I remember a
yeah,
lot of poaching in his D
a,
minus one.
a lot of poaching, absolutely. But then, I mean, you saw him come out of his shell in his draft plus one. I mean, his draft year was a bit of the same. He basically forced a move from St. John to Sherbrooke in the QMJHL. And once he joined Sherbrooke, we saw a bit better from him. But over the summer, after being drafted by the Montreal Canadiens in the fifth round of the 2021 NHL draft, um, he lost like 20 pounds and got a lot fitter, a lot slimmer, a lot faster, and just improved his endurance a lot. He was able to get through shifts without any problem. So
Mm,
that's already like one big change, but also the modifications in the way he approaches the game, the way that he learned adaptability on the fly. I mean, all this we saw in his draft plus one. He was the best goal scorer in the QMJHL. He had over 100 points and was just by far the best player on Sherbrooke. And then he went to the World Juniors and played with Connor Bedard and Logan Stankoven on the line together, and was such a fantastic compliment to those guys. He went from pure sniper, best player on his team, to kind of the third wheel on a team, but like the important third wheel on the team that makes them be able to kind of drive the game, right? I mean, I feel like the World Juniors was his coming out party. Do you agree?
I do. I think that that was kind of where he showed not only himself, but also the Habs organization that he is really quite versatile. And I think the one thing that at least I still had a lot of doubts about in his D+1 season when he was breaking out in the queue was how is he going to perform when he's not the go-to guy on his line, when he's not the one that's being set up consistently, when he's not the one that is kind of like being fed by all his line mates because he is the focus. He's the focal point of the offense. And at the World Juniors, because he's playing with Connor Bedard and Logan Stankoven, he naturally had to slot into the role of the player that is doing the dirty work in order to open up space for his line mates. And obviously Logan Stankoven does a lot of that dirty work because he loves it, but Joshua Roy had to kind of learn how to be a lot more proactive with that. And I love how he's been able to kind of like find different roles that he can do really well. And that adaptability is so important. And like we're already seeing it in the NHL. Like I've been seeing like periods where he's doing a lot more forechecking and he's kind of testing things out, trying to see what kind of fits with his line mates, what's working for him against this level of competition. And he knows that he has a really deep toolkit of possible styles to play that he knows how to support because he is a very intelligent player and he knows how to support his line mates and how his line mates can support him in different roles. And I think that that awareness and that adaptability is really going to be key for him if he wants to really dig out a middle six role for the Habs long term.
100%. The other part of that for me is, I mean, his physical tools were decent in terms of his ability to push off opponents and use his strength to kind of win battles along the boards. But somehow by losing weight, he got stronger. He got more physically capable. And by his final year in the QMJHL, we were looking at a player whose main strength was his ability to win board battles, to shield pucks down low, to win back pucks on the forecheck and force turnovers below the goal line. I mean, he suddenly became a player whose main ability is in one-on-one battles. Whereas in his draft year, he was doing a lot of just staying at the perimeter, waiting for a puck to pop out, and then kind of poaching. So just that shift in his mentality, that shift in his play style, and just the added, he started taking it seriously, I feel, after his draft year. After being
Yeah.
picked by the Montreal Canadiens, I feel like it's just a switch flipped in his brain. Like, I have a shot at the NHL, and now he's there and he's doing great. I feel like long term, this is where Joshua Roy tops out as a really good third line winger.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you can work him up, if you can work on some things in his game, you might have him become kind of a complementary piece on a really good second or third or first line. A player who can play the same role he played with Bedard and Stankoven, but in the NHL. If that's what you get long term at a Joshua Roy, a fifth rounder in 2021, you're laughing. That's fantastic value. And yeah, this is a player who was drafted first overall in the QMJHL. Like, there's pedigree there and there's skill there, and we know that. But no one expected him to go from the player he was in his draft year to the player he is now. I don't think anyone expected that. Even the scouts that drafted him in Montreal were saying like 90% of the job is him. We just saw the potential for him to be able to flip that switch, but it was on him to flip that switch. So yeah, I mean, overall, great start to his first, I mean, steps in the NHL for Joshua Roy, and great start to his professional season. Like great numbers in the HL as well. So it's looking up for the fifth rounder of Montreal. But that wraps things up for our first segment. Now we're getting into some lesser discussed NHL prospects. We'll start with some defensemen. We'll talk Simon Nemec, Luke Hughes, David Jiricek, and Ryan Johnson of the Buffalo Sabres right after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with whenever you place a $5 bet. That's $150 that you get in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can spend on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team to go all the way and win the Super Bowl this season, or for your favorite quarterback to just throw for a couple of TDs in the next game, the choice is yours. I know I personally love using same game parlay specifically, which FanDuel offer, which can make any game so much more exciting, especially if you're attending it live. That's my personal tradition when I go to live games. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to some lesser discussed NHL prospects. We'll talk about defensemen first. Let's start with Shimon Ytz. I mean, he's been having a decent start to his season, especially with Dougie Hamilton out for the season in New Jersey. The second overall pick of the 2022 NHL draft recently played his first game against his longtime childhood friend, Yuri Slafkovsky, in this Montreal versus New Jersey game. And it's rocky, but it's looking fairly good as well for the defenseman. Talk me through kind of what you've seen from Nemec in his start. I mean, we're talking about a player who has 10 points in 22 games from the blue line for New Jersey, which is not bad, playing on the second power play. Like, what's your thoughts on him so far?
He's been good. I mean, like we're calling this segment lesser discussed prospects, which is very much more about ourselves than,
Yeah.
than overall. Like we can't really talk about a second overall pick as like under the radar, but
Yeah.
we haven't spent too much time talking about him because he's been playing quite subtly so far this season, which has honestly been a good thing. Like I've liked the performances I've seen. They haven't like popped off the page in terms of making me like want to bring him up consistently on the show, but he's been really, really solid. I've liked his distribution on the power play. I think that he's really learning how to deal with pressure and forechecking when he has possession at the blue line, and really shifting the overall power play and deciding on which side he wants the attack to continue, and he's really refining that offensive game. Of course, he has a wicked shot, which he's been using a decent amount of the power play too, as a threat from distance and to be tipped. But overall, I've liked how his decision making has just remained so calm, and like this has been a massive strength of his going back to his draft year. It's just been the raw composure in his game that is just so impressive. Like he's so refined and capable and consistent, and I've been seeing that this season where sure he's not going end to end and making highlight reel plays like Pavel Mintyukov is doing at times, but he is playing some really consistent hockey, and there's a reason that New Jersey is trusting him enough to be playing him like 20 minutes and 46 seconds a night right now, which is quite trusting. That is like a time on ice for a solid number 3 defenseman already, and New Jersey's not a bad team. So I think that he's been doing quite solidly, and I've liked what I've seen so far.
100%, fully agreed. And yeah, you mentioned the composer. I mean, it's what stands out every time you watch Shimon Ytz. I mean, going back to this draft here, I kept thinking like, I think this is the most mentally solid defenseman I've watched in a long time. Like his panic threshold is so high. His ability to just stay calm in the face of like multi-layered pressure is just ridiculous. Obviously, the offensive tools are still being worked out, and I think the defensive game is still being worked out. We saw some glimpses of that against Montreal. I mean, we're talking about a player who still struggles to identify kind of how to approach 2-on-1s, how to approach multivariable scenarios defensively. But like,
Yeah,
yeah, I remember this specific play, which was Joshua Roy's first NHL goal.
he gifted him the first NHL goal. Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it felt like he was defending an empty net. I felt like he was basically defending like as if he didn't have a goalie behind him. He wasn't really. I mean, I don't think he covered the pass at any time during that 2-on-1, and there were 2 passes, and like at no point that I feel like, oh, he's in the passing lane right now. No, he was just like facing the net the whole time, which gave Joshua Roy one timer from the very, very low slot. So it was just like,
very, very low slot.
yeah, exactly. So it's just like that's still a work in progress, but overall, I feel for a rookie who was drafted, just a year and a half ago, like this is decent. This is looking really well, and between him and David Jiricek right now, I mean, I like David Jiricek's game a tiny. I like David Jiricek's tools a tiny bit more, but I like Nemetz's overall game a lot more. I feel like Nemec can impact the game in a much more translatable way. The only issue for Nemec right now is probably never going to be the first power play defenseman for New Jersey. Luke Hughes is way too good offensively. Dougie Hamilton, same thing. Even with him out, Nemec is second string. So it makes things a bit difficult for him to rack up points, but overall, I think that there's potential here to become a really good defenseman, especially if he's paired with Luke Hughes long term. If he works on that defensive game and becomes more of that, sit back, think the game type defenseman.
The anchor, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this could be a really good pairing. But moving on to David Jiricek, actually, do we talk about Luke Hughes for a second? I feel like we should talk about Luke Hughes for a second. 24 points in 43 games. He's got 8 goals and 16 assists. He's playing on the top power play. Jack and Quinn Hughes have called him the best of the three. And I got that feeling in this draft here, but obviously, I mean, Jack Hughes is a generational prospect. Quinn Hughes is headed that way as well. Do you think Luke Hughes gets there one day?
I'm saying no, and that's just me trying to not put too much pressure on Luke, because with the jump that Quinn has taken in his play this season, going from elite level offensive defenseman to like seemingly generational defenseman period, this season so far, and of course the sample size is still half a season at this point, but it's been blindingly good. And with Jack Hughes just continuing to forge his way towards generational level talent as well, I think that Luke would have to press the hyperdrive button on his development to catch up, which isn't necessarily a fair expectation, but he's going to be a fascinating and great player no matter what. And I think that comparing brothers to brothers is not always the most productive of strategies. Like we saw with the Stalls for quite a while there too, where like it was like the question of, will Jordan Stahl catch up to Eric? And it's like he never quite did in terms of production, but then instead he became a massively effective shutdown centerman who's still like putting up like league best defensive metrics as a 36-year-old playing third line minutes in Carolina this year. So Luke is going to be a very different player from his brothers. He doesn't have the same like overall like not skating fluidity, but like fluidity of being able to layer all those tools that both Quinn and Jack are really portraying this season. I haven't seen that from Luke just yet, but maybe he matures into it. But at the very least, he is the future of New Jersey's offensive defenseman. Like it is a really, really beautiful 1-2 punch to have him and Simon Nemec, because they do complement each other so well. I think that in terms of like projected 5-on-5 defensive pairings in like 2-3 years time, that's going to be one of the better ones in the league. And yeah, it's going to be fun to watch those two players develop alongside each other.
Absolutely. A quick word on David Jiricek. He's back in the AHL right now. After playing a decent amount of games, he played 36 games for the Blue Jackets, has 9 points. But overall, I feel like with Jiricek, again, it's the tools. They're so impressive. He's such a big guy who rips the puck, was able to stick handle, was able to pass really well. Physically, he handles himself defensively really, really well. Being only -1 on the Columbus Blue Jackets is a feat in 36 games. But yeah, he's back in the AHL, has played 1 game so far, and is kind of being sent down to kind of work a bit more on his game. And I get it. I mean, he's still not refined in terms of his overall processing, decision making. Those need some work. But before we end off and go to break here, I just want to talk about Ryan Johnson for a second. Ryan Johnson of the Buffalo Sabres. This was a prospect who, on defense, I thought, he was headed into his senior year in college last season, and I saw his profile and I was like, I mean, sure, if the Sabres can sign him, great, but I didn't think it was really a priority. But I was so impressed with this game after watching him, play a decent handful of games in the NHL. I mean, there are some very specific things that he does really well. The way that he seals bodies off pucks, the way that he cuts, he checks through opponents' hands rather than just focusing on their body, which makes it so difficult to handle a puck as a forward on the forecheck below your goal line when a player's just basically hitting your hands. It's so difficult to get a handle on the puck and do something good with it. So overall, I've just been so impressed with Johnson's game. And even though he only has 5 points in 26 games, he was +5 on the Buffalo Sabres, played some really good hockey, some reliable hockey, and was just so rock solid defensively, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't see much of that in his final year in college. So I was really, really impressed with the tape that I saw from Johnson. It's a really good skater. He's a really good rush defender as well. But like for me, mainly it's just how he handles himself below his goal line and along the boards. For a defenseman that's pretty average sized, I really was not expecting that. And when you have a player that's good at something so specific, you can find him a role on your team long term. I would not be surprised at all if Ryan Johnson becomes like a full time number 5 defenseman or even maybe number 4 defenseman. He's got the toolkit for it. He's got the skills for it, and he's got the master of one thing going on, which is really important in the NHL. But that wraps things up for our second segment about the defensemen we've talked less about on this podcast than others. And now we'll get into some forwards we haven't talked about as much that deserve some praise. Looking at the Luke Evangelista, Ridly Greig, Matthew Knies, Connor Zari, and a lot more after these messages from our sponsors over at Gametime. If you're looking for cheap tickets last minutes to any event, Gametime has you covered. Whether that's sports, theater, comedy, or whatever needs tickets, you can get them last minute on Gametime. You can also get them sometimes an hour after the event starts on Gametime. They're a great source for great deals. When you have a schedule that changes a lot like mine does, you can find yourself with an afternoon free out of nowhere. Gametime is a fantastic place to get started. They've got a bunch of deals and they're obsessed with saving you money. My favorite deal that they offer is called Zone Deals. Basically, Gametime picks a seat. All you do is pick the section, and Gametime gets you an offer with about an average of 18% of savings. And with the Gametime guarantee, you always get the best price. If you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what Gametime has to offer, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Use code LOCKEDON at checkout for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, it's really simple. All you have to do is create an account, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for $20 off your first purchase at Gametime. So check out Gametime right away. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so ending things off with our final segment here, we'll talk about some prospects we haven't discussed as much at forward this time. Among the prospects at the NHL level right now, we'll start off with Matthew Knies, who's been having a decent start to his NHL campaign. We're talking about a player who started off the season basically paired to Matthews and Marner. He's played a game recently on the 4th line, so he's been kind of oscillating in the lineup more or less. But I mean, for an NHL rookie who was picked in the second round, this is not bad at all, right?
Not bad whatsoever. No, like he's been progressing very quickly. Like I remember being like a bit surprised when Toronto picked him that high, and then I watched a bit of his D+1 tape and was a lot less surprised as to why Toronto picked him. And I think that that's only progressed since then. Like Matthew Knies' development on a year-to-year basis has been quite exceptional since his draft, and I've really liked what he's been adding to Toronto's lineup. Like he's one of the better scanners among any NHL rookie this season. His head is constantly on a swivel. He's very, very aware, which makes him such a useful supporting tool on any line, and it makes him quite adaptable and has added a lot of versatility to the Leafs lineup this year from what I've seen, because they can just slot him in next to guys like Matthews and Marner. And while he might not be scoring even at half of their pace, he is creating time and space for them. He's getting the puck to dangerous areas. He is getting himself to dangerous areas more than anything, and constantly aware of where his teammates are and where the defenses and the weaknesses are. So that's been very key. And I think if he's able to continue to kind of double down on that awareness as like the key cog of his style, I think the Leafs are going to have a tremendously versatile perennial top 6 winger on their hands within a year or two here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at Matthew Knies' game, and I feel like the Leafs have gotten really good at this, especially with their additions recently of Fraser Minton and Easton Cowan, of just finding
Yeah.
players who can slot in on a line like Matthews, with a combo like Matthews and Marner or Nylander and Tavares, and just plug in and do exactly what they're supposed to do, which is keep their head on a swivel, get you the puck, get their teammates the puck right away, and just make it so much easier for the other two players on the line to get puck touches in quality areas. I think that's super, super important. And Knies, Minton, and Cowan, all three of them do that really, really well. Overall, with Knies, I mean, you're looking at a player whose work rate is off the charts. His physical tools are off the charts. He's able to skate really fast, get to spots really quickly, and combine that with his ability to constantly know where his teammates are. And very rarely do you see Matthew Knies just hold on to pucks too long. Very, very often he's playing pucks quickly, tape to tape, and then moving to the next spot. He's a very simple player in his approach to the offensive game. He's going to destroy you on the forecheck. He's going to outwork you on the back check. He's going to race you to loose pucks and win them. But once he gets the puck, tape to tape move. That's what he does, and I think that's fantastic in terms of what he brings to the Leafs lineup, and it's a great addition for them. But moving on to Luke Evangelista, he's been fairly good as well, and I don't think he's being talked about enough at all. Period. Not just on our podcast. He's got 21 points in 44 games. That comes with 13 minutes and 37 seconds of ice time, which is, I mean, wow. Like, Luke Evangelista was a prospect I liked in his draft year, but not to the point where I thought he'd be half a point a game in his rookie year, despite playing almost half as much as some other forwards. So yeah, what's your thoughts on him?
He's been very good. I've liked what I've seen there. I think that Nashville's drafting's been quite solid in the last couple of seasons, and he's one of the first of that like new kind of wave of prospects to really be making an impact. Like we saw Philip Tomasino start making an impact like 2 years ago, before having a full AHL season again last year, which was questionable as a development strategy, but they seem to be back on the train of just really supporting their young players and giving them opportunities, allowing them to make mistakes. And Evangelista is such a player that combines flair with intelligence and composure, and that was one thing that always stood out to me for him when he was playing with London in the OHL. He was their captain quite recently, and I always really appreciated how he was able to kind of blend those two sides of his game, the composed and like good scanning habits, like two-way center role that he took on, with the skill and the flair and the skating ability that make him quite dynamic at times, but don't really define him entirely either. And what I've liked a lot this season is that balance that he's kind of been like nurturing in his own game throughout his junior career is really easing his transition to the NHL, where he's able to kind of on a game to game or period to period basis kind of adjust his own style to kind of match what his team needs, what the game is calling for in that moment. And
Yeah.
it's an adaptability that I've really liked in his game so far, which also demonstrates the intelligence that he has.
Absolutely. And moving on to Connor Zari, who's been having a really good start. He's seventh currently in NHL scoring among rookies. He's got 22 points in 35 games. That's fewer games than anyone ahead of him. And he's tied for sixth, actually, with Dmitry Voronkov over in Columbus, and only 2 points behind Luke Hughes at fifth, 3 points behind Brock Faber at fourth. So all he needs is 3 points, and he's tied for third, and he's got, 35 games played. It's a great start to the season, and Zari was a player that I didn't really expect high numbers from at all ever. I saw him as a player who really tops out as a bottom six forward who's going to do some really good defensive work. He's going to give you some great shifts on the forecheck. But he's added some offensive tools, and a fair amount of them has gotten way better at putting pucks in the back of the net, at connecting with teammates in transition, and just finding players in the offensive zone with quick 1-2 passes. There's a lot more intricacy and quickness to his game offensively than there was before, and I really like what I see there. Zari is kind of in the same mold as Matthew Knies in the sense of a player who is good defensively, gives you good forechecks, but also plays the puck very quickly. It's just I feel like with Zari, you're looking at a player who has a lot more responsibility on a Calgary team that's struggling right now, and has a lot more opportunities to work himself into a top six role and stay there permanently and eventually become the main piece on the second line or that kind of thing. He's been fairly impressive for me so far, and yeah, I've liked what I've seen in the games I've watched of Calgary. But that brings us to Ridly Greig, who I think is a massively underrated prospect for the Ottawa Senators. Talk me through what you've heard, what you've seen, and what you've read from him so far in the NHL.
I liked him a lot. Like I've caught him live a couple times when I was still living in Ottawa, and the times when I could make it out to Canada for those games, which is a trek and a half, but
Yeah.
worth it for the NHL game. But he's been really, really excellent. Ridly Greig is a player that has immediately won himself into the hearts of Sens fans with just his style of play. He's so active. He's so intense. He's really quite intelligent, very defensively capable, but has an element of offensive, maybe not flair, but talent and skill that isn't perhaps popping off the page in terms of beauty at all times, but is very effective and very straightforward. He gets to the net, he gets to the dirty areas, and he's able to kind of use his decent handling ability to kind of make those situations a bit easier for him. I quite like his passing game as well. He's a really quite capable playmaker, and so far for Ottawa has really kind of been like taking over Shane Pinto's role, as Shane Pinto's been like out for the first half of the season with his ban, his suspension for gambling, and he's been doing it very, very well. Perhaps not the same level of flair that Shane Pinto's goal scoring may bring, and but I think that Ridly Greig is, at least now, he's a more well-rounded player as a whole already than Shane Pinto was at last season. So I've
Fully
liked Ridly
agreed.
Greig a lot.
Fully agreed. Yeah, I think Greg again is just massively underrated, and the defensive ability, the ability to move pucks in transition, and the offensive flair that he brings at times is just, it's so good for what Ottawa needs in their bottom six. And I feel like eventually Greg can work himself into a full term kind of second line role. He's played there in intervals, but not nearly
Yeah.
enough. I feel like he can nail that role long term. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They're a 24/7 news channel over on YouTube that keeps you updated on what's going on around the sporting world. Make sure to leave us a comment and also a review if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform. It's always very much appreciated. This has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.